Done.
Thank you very much. Okay, and just at the end of last session, we did get a question just regarding how to sign for shared paths. And here's just a brilliant or terrible example, depending how you look at it. But the requirement to actually sign at the start and end of every type of where the facility ends kind of thing. And I just think that this is an absolute ridiculous feature, because that really doesn't benefit anyone. And there's no way cyclists are going to be dismounting at those tiny little, access points or footpaths or whatever they are crossing. So it's really not achieving what, the signs are there for. It's just a waste of space and a waste of resources to be putting them in the ground to start with. However, if we are to reference the Australian standards, so this is Australian standard 1742.9, which is the bicycle facility standards. We are legally required to designate legally designate a path as a shared path, and it shall be provided at the beginning of the path, immediately after each road or path crossing, elsewhere such that the spacing does not exceed 500 meters, and at the end of the path. So in other words, unfortunately, it is in our Australian standards that we are meant to be providing these signs at every single, road crossing to say that it ends, and it is a common feature, but it's certainly not a great thing to be doing. And it's perhaps, a sign of the times that the Australian standards are just not really reflecting, what the community kind of needs, and it's not really of great benefit to be doing it. Ken?
Oh, sorry. Just an important thing I think to clarify there, though, is that in most states, we're not required to put that cyclist dismount sign. It's correct. Yeah. It's just an end path and start path sign. So that's completely ridiculous, because no way a cyclists are going to dismount. So our ones just start and end sign. So that's I think an important clarification. Then a question from Carl was around, is that the same in Queensland, where it is okay, it is legal to ride on footpaths and the like? So it might be one we have to check.
Yeah, I don't believe that it is, because it's the same in Tas, where you're allowed to ride on the footpaths, and I don't believe that they actually have to sign their shared paths like that. So, but one we can check offline.
Yeah, we'll have a look into that. Most jurisdictions, you got to. Have we got a picture of that? So
I've got on the next slide, Ken. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Yeah.
It's all good.
Okay.
Which leads me to my next slide. So that's the type of sign that's kind of required. Sometimes it's also as a supplementary plate, like end is just on its own plate, but just to specify where the shared path ends. And for those that have reviewed the first module 360-degree VR video, would love to hear your feedback if you managed to get it all working, if you put on the goggles and stuff like that, and how you found it, if it was dizzying or you really felt like you're cycling across these facilities. In the video, there were these two examples, example 1, example 2, and they're both examples of shared paths crossing over roads and different ways to manage that crossing. And the first poll for this webinar I've actually got is, if you don't mind running it, Ken, is just asking, which one did you think would be considered best practice? So we've got 2 different examples here, and hopefully the poll has jumped up on your screen. Which example shows best practice design for a shared path crossing a road? I'll just give you a few moments to put those together.
And we're getting a little bit of feedback there from people saying that they thought the footage was great. They loved being able to look to the sides. So that's excellent. And we've certainly got some more of that coming along for you throughout the course. Good way to get out there in the saddle without being in the saddle, I suppose.
Fabulous. And it looks like we've got 100% answered there, Ken. So we might just end the poll.
Yep.
and share the results. And looks like overwhelmingly we're seeing that example number 1 is getting the big tick as the preferred option. And I would tend to agree with that, as what you've got there is you've got priority for the cyclists. So this is in Victoria where we've got that yellow paint, which is suggesting a shared path crossing. But what that actually means is the motorists that are approaching this crossing point, they're actually forced to give way. So pedestrians and cyclists, they have the priority crossing there. So that's just a big tick just for connectivity. But another real awesome feature of this design is the fact that this crossing point is raised up. So what that means is motorists are physically required to slow down because there's a hump in their carriageway. So they're going to be slowing down, looking for cyclists, and should a collision occur, it's going to be at lower speeds. You know, if that was just at grade and cyclists were given priority, but on the carriageway, you may have a less of a chance of motorists actually giving way. And yeah, if that collision were to occur, a bit higher speed. So lots of beautiful features going on there with example 1. Example 2, you do have a raised feature, but it's just prior to the crossing point. So you could say that there's, you know, at least there's going to be vehicles slowing down. However, it's unfortunate that, yeah, you've got this cyclist or shared path end feature, which means, yeah, cyclists are meant to, you know, pause, hold on to that rail there and, you know, give way to any motorists within that carriageway and then cross over, which is not really going to happen in the real world. Cyclists want to continue on their journey, and they might slow down a little bit, but they generally want to keep going, which, you know, increases the risk of being struck whilst on the carriageway there. Ken, any questions there, or?
No, a few more comments about the 360 footage. I'm sure the pack to Western Australia is coming soon. Maybe got stuck at the border over there, like other things. What I was going to say, yeah, the example 2, I suppose, it's not the worst scenario. I mean, I think the slowing of vehicles using raised on the approach to it from one side is a pretty good thing. It's certainly not the best, as you say, but yeah, some interesting points there. In scenario 2, cars turning into the side road will often fail to give way to parked users. So a much higher risk option, and cars on side road don't need to give way. Example 1 is much better. Yeah, so that turning in is an interesting one, isn't it? So technically cars have to give way, don't they, in that turn in, but they so often don't, and especially if they're making a last minute put the foot down to, you know, get in on a gap. It's quite a nasty situation. So a raised threshold is really great treatment and continuing that path through.
Yep, no, completely agree. And not everyone is aware of that requirement as well, that motorists are actually required to give way in those locations when they're turning in. So yeah. And
Carl's pointed out that a for sale sign has blocked some sight lines in case 2 as well. So they're already getting into the cycling auditor space there, picking the unique situations. Well done.
Very good. Good eyes there, Carl. We'll hop on to today's agenda because we do have lots to cover. Today we'll be talking about on-road bicycle lanes. So we're hopping away from the off-road facilities, which as I mentioned is generally what would be considered best practice. You get your highest volumes of cycling traffic, you know, ages between 8 to 80. They love to use off-road facilities. However, there's lots of good work to be done within on-road cycling provision and providing a better outcome for cyclists, bringing them on road. And that's what we'll be discussing today. So generally what we want to be seeing is lots and lots of these facilities, protected bicycle lanes. They're also could be referred to as Copenhagen lanes. There's a couple ways to actually arrange those types of designs. So you can have one-way paths, two-way paths, or bi-directional paths. And there's also lots of different ways you can actually separate cycling traffic and general traffic. So going to hop through some of those different separated types, just so you've got some ideas of the types of products that are out there. And yeah, not to get too honed in that there's only one type of separation. And if you can't get the full Copenhagen with a 1 meter treatment, then you can't do anything. Well, there's other options out there. So we just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that. We'll also look at on-road bicycle lanes. So this is where there's no physical separation. Discuss the risks of dooring. Talk about some different pavement marking techniques that you can implement to create some buffers from both the dooring zone and the general traffic. Talk about exclusive bike lanes. And this last one, the wide curbside bike lane, it's unfortunately still within our standards and guidelines, but it's not really one that facilitates cyclist safety, and it's not one that we'd be advocating for, because it doesn't really do a good job of encouraging cyclists to actually use the area, or doesn't do a good job of safety for cyclists either. And the final topic for today will be talking about mixing traffic, where cyclists basically ride in the traffic lane. So they are basically treated like a car. And the way to facilitate that is through sharrows. If you haven't heard that term before, we'll get stuck into that. And just reiterating the importance of local area traffic management within these mixed traffic environments, because you don't want to be having high operating speeds and a slower cyclist that's riding in the traffic lane, because that's just not going to end well. So just reinforcing that message of, if you are mixing cyclists with general traffic, it needs to be in a low operating speed environment. Let's get stuck into a protected bicycle lane. So here's an example that you will see if you are, or when you watch the 360-degree VR footage, which will be at the end of this module. And this is a really awesome example because it's actually a very wide facility. And it's allowing cyclists to ride two abreast. This is just a one-way facility, so there's another protected bicycle lane on the other side of the carriageway, which permits travel in the other direction. And this is just such an attractive feature because cyclists, they're away from parked vehicles and they're also away from live traffic because of this separation feature that we can see here. So it can give just a lot of confidence to cyclists that they don't need to be worried about, a door opening and, flinging open and colliding with them, or, someone veering out of their traffic lane and colliding with them. You've got this own separate space where you can cycle, and you're also away from pedestrians, which would be using this footpath over here. So this is still a really brilliant feature where you can't get off-road paths in. This works incredibly well for safety and just for, a cyclist's comfort. If you build these things, cyclists will be riding them because it's just a really good experience to be doing. And I touched on before, the width of these facilities is actually quite important. If it's too narrow, you run the risk of cyclists kind of getting stuck behind a slower cyclist, and being channeled into this space where they may not be able to overtake or anything like that. And that could actually lead to cyclists then just opting to use the road instead because they don't want to get stuck behind a slower cyclist. So this is a really good example where there's enough width to ride side by side, enough width to overtake if there was a slower cyclist. And yeah, it's just one of the better rides that we've got around our network. So you will get to see exactly how that feels when you review the VR footage. So you'll get to see how that feels actually cycling this. And we compare that to what it feels like riding when there's no provision for a protected cycle lane. So you'll get to experience it riding adjacent the dooring zone and quickly compare, your own level of safety in both examples. So you'll get to see that when you review that footage. Before I get stuck into the design details, just wanted to share this quick survey response that confirms the reason that you'd consider doing these types of bicycle lanes. And basically, yeah, this survey was done within Melbourne, but I would say this data would be fairly global. And it's just suggesting that if you're building protected bicycle lanes, so you're away from the parking lane, you're away from the general traffic lane, 83% of people feel confident to ride within that space. And whenever you're looking at strategic cycling corridors or the cycling routes that within your municipality are considered priority routes, you want to be attracting, the largest possible number of cyclists to be using that. And that means providing protected lanes, because if we can compare that to typically where we've been using on-road bicycle lanes is just using a painted lane. So we're installing the bicycle lane adjacent the dooring zone. Only 22% of people feel confident to ride in that space. So there's no way you're going to get the same level of uptake or the same volumes compared to the protected bicycle lane. And it's also interesting to note that we're still not getting 100% confident to ride within the protected lanes. That could be a variety of factors, but certainly I think this clearly states that if you've got, if you're trying to prioritize cycling movements and all you're building is a painted bicycle lanes, there's still only a snapshot of cyclists that you will be, getting towards that facility, because lots of people don't feel confident or safe to ride in those environments. So just something to consider if you are currently designing or developing cycleways in these spaces. There's a very good reason to be opting for protected bicycle lanes. For those that haven't actually seen, sorry, Ken, did you want to jump in there?
I was just going to say there's a few things coming in, but you're going to cover them off. So I just want people to know that they'll be covered shortly.
Not a problem. For those that haven't seen the protected bicycle lanes before, just given this typical cross-section of how it can be arranged. And this is for one-way paths or single direction. And the main features to note is you've got your bicycle lane and it's to the curb side of the parking lane. So rather than, closer to the traffic lane, it's closer to the curb. So yeah, typically you would have had your parking lane adjacent the curb there, but this arrangement flips those positions. So bicycle lane is close to the curb. Then there's some type of separator facility. We'll go into some details of exactly what that separation can look like. Then your parking lane, and then you're through traffic lanes. And the exact same thing is mirrored on the other side here. So these one-way paths are really, really useful where you've got kind of cyclists, they would like to visit both sides of the carriageway. And I'll get to an example of what I'm talking about there. But there's also times where you may just put cyclists on one side of the road, which is called a bi-directional facility. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like. There's merits and kind of disadvantages to both, I suppose, but generally the one-way paths are the most common protected bicycle lane you'll see. I've got this example here of a one-way protected bicycle lane. The separator used in this example is what would be considered kind of a Copenhagen lane treatment. For those that have heard that term before, Copenhagen was kind of seen the leader within this space for a very long time, providing these types of lanes, and that's why they've been called this type of treatment. But it's basically just, some type of concrete and curbing with an infill there, and it's usually about 1 meter wide, and that fully protects the cyclist riding within their bicycle lane from a car door opening. So even if a parked vehicle that's within this space opens the car door, that physical separation should be wide enough to allow a car door to open. Actually, while I'm talking about that, just as I suppose a little to note, a car door can actually swing open about 1.2 meters wide, which is probably a bit more than you would consider. Which would suggest that perhaps we should be, aiming for these separators to be that 1.2 meters wide to fully, protect a cyclist from that opening door. Acknowledge that not all carriageways have that, existing width available. And so even if you aren't able to achieve that 1.2, maybe a 1 meter or 0.8 meters, it's still better than having an on-road bicycle facility that's painted right next to the dooring zone. So yeah, don't be too hung up on if you can't fully achieve a facility that looks exactly like this. There's still benefits in getting some form of protection in there. So here's how a bidirectional facility looks. And as mentioned, this is when we've got the cyclist just traveling on one side of the road. Okay, so this is particularly beneficial when all the kind of activity and all the points of interest are located on one side of the road. So an example of that could be maybe you're cycling along, let's just say like an esplanade or something like that, and you want to be cycling along the beach side. On the other side is just residential, and there's nothing particularly exciting there. There's no cafes, there's no restaurants, or no schools or libraries or anything like that. So you just want to keep your cyclists all onto one side of the carriageway. That's where this type of facility really makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to be encouraging crossing over. You don't want to be encouraging, those two different directions. So you just bring cyclists onto one side, and that's where the bi-directional facility is. And then the other side can just be, the carriageway as normal. There are some inherent risks associated with this type of design, which I will get into, but just to give you an example of this in practice, we've got this one here. I believe this one's in Sydney. And you'll also note, for those with eagle eyes, that the separator facility is a lot narrower than what I was just showing before. And I might pause there, Ken, and give out a prize. If anyone could have a guess why this facility would be narrower in this example as opposed to the example I showed before. A little bit of a tricky question, but we'll see if anyone's able to spot.
A few good comments coming in, but while a few others put their comment in, Sean made an interesting point there around the Dutch way to open car doors, and that we should have those rules and alleviate it. And I did say that that's one of Max's favourite trivia questions, which has now been stolen, but that's the old, what is the Dutch reach? And do you want to explain that, Max?
I'll cross that one off the list then. That was going to be a trivia question, but yes, the Dutch reach is where, if you imagine you're parked in like a shopping strip district or something like that, and there's an on-road bicycle lane to your right-hand side, rather than, as we traditionally do, open the door with our right hand and just fling it open, the Dutch reach is all about, let's use the opposite hand further away to open the door, and that actually forces your neck and your line of sight to look backwards and look for an oncoming vehicle. So it's just that philosophy of, okay, I'm where cyclists are. I'm physically going to change my actions to make sure I'm looking where cyclists will be.
Good, thank you. And lots of people saying no parking, no parking, no parking. So people talking about space as well there. Eagle Eye there, and I'm not sure who it is because it's a username, but I can work that out. Says you can see the yellow line marking to indicate no parking, just where you've circled there. So that's a good spot. Surprises there?
Yeah, let's give the first person that said the no parking. That's exactly right. Because we don't have the risk there of the door swinging open. This is examples where you can reduce that separator width, because it's basically just providing a physical separation between a traffic lane, and you wouldn't expect for that added risk of doors opening in these locations. So super common to do this, to narrow the separation where there isn't the parking lane. So excellent work. So I might also just, sorry.
I was just going to say, prize to Kathy there, quickly followed by Jamie, but maybe Kathy's internet is quicker there, and Carmen was closely followed behind. I also point out that maybe some guideposts would be good on the median. So maybe some sort of flexible posts or something on that might be an idea.
Yep.
The other one that's come in as well is around the fact that riders are going in the other direction. So the door would not be it would be a glance off the door, I suppose, rather than the.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think that's a good one. Thank you.
That's okay. And while I'm actually on this image, I may also just point out these kind of breaks that we have here in the separator facility. And that's very, very common in these types of facilities. And the reason for that is to allow for drainage, because you could imagine if this was just a consistent concrete curb the whole way along, all the water would kind of pool within this facility here and actually on the live carriageway, which would not be a good outcome. So what you would need to do if you were to do that is basically shift all your drainage pits and stuff to these curbs or these new separators, which would be very expensive. So rather than having to do all that, if you just provide these breaks, in regular intervals, it allows, I've got way too much drawing on this slide now, but it allows the water to come through and then access the already used curb and channel and existing pits, and you're not creating that pooling risk. So that's why those gaps are in there. Ken.
Question that's come in, what do you think the pram ramp's for there? Or is that just legacy, used to be there, or what's going on there?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'd say that just used to be there. It could potentially be connecting to some type of path. Maybe cyclists actually want to get off there. Maybe there's a park there or something like that. I'm not too sure. This one was taken from, this is TMR, Queensland. Selection and design of cycle tracks.
Parking. Provides access to parking, the bike parking potentially up a little bit further.
Oh, there you go. Well spotted. Yeah, that's exactly right. So maybe that's the intent, just to provide an on-ramp to the actual footpath area.
Yeah. Good. Okay, let's keep going. Lots to cover. Good. Thanks for the good interaction, everybody. Doing well.
The bi-directional lanes, I'm just going to go through some kind of pros and cons, and I'm not trying to sway your interest in either, because both offer protection from general traffic and parking lanes. They both have lots of merits, and I don't think there's one better than the other, but there are certain considerations that you need to look into. So as mentioned, both of them provide physical separation, so they get a tick for both of them. They provide, the one-way provides physical separation between cyclists traveling in opposing directions. Theoretically, you could collide head-on with another cyclist. It's particularly relevant if there's pavement defects, if there's like a pothole in the middle of the bicycle lane and you have to swerve to get out of the way and you're swerving onto oncoming cyclists. That would be an issue in the bi-directional facility. Both of them reduce the risk of dooring. The bi-directional actually maximizes the use of the existing carriageway. The reason for that is because if you're providing the separators, I'll just take the example of a meter width. If you're doing one way each way, you have to do a 1 meter width there and a 1 meter width on the other side of the carriageway. If it's bi-directional, you just need one separator. And you might think that that's pretty negligible, but carriageway widths are a very, very touchy topic, and kind of every 100 mil is just, allocated finely. So that can be another thing that would influence your choice for a single way or bi-directional facility. But these last points really only apply to the one-way facility. And the best way to describe these is maybe with some photos, which I've got in the next few slides, but cycling facilities are present on both sides of the carriageway, enabling cycling access to destinations on both sides of the road. Makes sense. That's only for one-way facility. Vehicles entering, exiting driveways have a reduced number of conflict points. I might just show the photo straight away. I'll just keep these there for reference later on if you ever need to, if you're ever toying with the idea of what type of facility, but I'll just get stuck into the photos just to make this a lot clearer rather than just using words. But here's an example of a driveway crossing over a bi-directional facility. And let's just say this traffic is all traveling in one way here. And intuitively, the driver will be looking this direction to pick a gap, looking at oncoming vehicles to make sure they can enter the carriageway safely. That's how we're trained to be looking. That's exactly, what we're used to, and that's just how we're programmed to function in these spaces. Nothing wrong with that. And so what that means is cyclists traveling in this direction is likely to be within the line of sight of that vehicle that's exiting that driveway. Unfortunately, cyclists traveling in this direction, not very common to start thinking about looking both ways when exiting a driveway. So maybe they were already looking this way for pedestrians. So there's maybe that's reduced the risk somewhat. However, bi-directional facilities, because they're not as common, drivers aren't really trained to be looking both ways. So that's one of the risks that you would need to consider if you were looking at bi-directional facilities. How many of those crossover points have you got? And what are you doing to reduce that risk? So you can see here, they've got this green paint, which is just indicating, obviously there's a conflict with cyclists, but it would be also pertinent or important to say that cyclists are in both directions. So look out for cyclists in both directions. That can be done in a sign, a pavement marking, but something that would need to be considered in these environments. Another risk that you've got with these bi-directional facilities, and this one is perhaps a greater risk, I would argue, is for your right turning vehicle. So imagine that same driveway and a vehicle on the carriageway wants to access that. I've just done a little snip here. I've just annotated the Transport for London drawing to show this risk and how it works. But if this vehicle wanted to turn right, once again, their line of sight is focused, everything that's within their windscreen, everything that's ahead of them. And so they're looking at oncoming traffic and they're looking at cyclists in this direction. To be able to spot cyclists traveling here that I've just circled in the yellow, that's to the right-hand side of them and it's behind them as well. Very, very difficult to be able to actually spot them. And that's not really, the fault of motorists or a lack of awareness that a bi-directional facility is there. It's just a physical thing. It's difficult to actually see. It's like a blind spot. It's difficult to see cyclists traveling there. And a good thing that they've incorporated within this particular design, acknowledge that it is just an artist's rendition, but they've kind of got this little break in the middle there. So theoretically, this vehicle could pause and then stop here and then give way to cyclists at that point. So rather than having to think about oncoming traffic and oncoming cyclists all in the one turning movement, they can kind of turn right, make sure there's a gap in the traffic, pause, and then pause again, and then give way to cyclists looking in both directions. So that's a really good outcome, really. Another thing you could look at is if you were to raise the section where cyclists are. So if this section was raised, for instance, that would force, once again, motorists that were turning and crossing that cyclist path to slow down, give way to cyclists. So it is something that you need to consider with these bi-directional facilities. If you've got lots of these openings, lots of the crossovers, lots of access to driveways, that's generally where you want to start looking for your single path either side, because you've just mitigated that risk. But there are also lots of benefits to doing a bi-directional path. So just giving you some things to consider, which may not be overtly obvious when you're just looking at design plans. Okay, as mentioned, we will get stuck into some separated types. So as mentioned, these ones are called your Copenhagen bicycle lanes, which is just using traditional curb and channel. And then there's some type of infill there to provide that buffer. It's physical separation. Really, really awesome. These are probably the gold standard. Really useful to use these as they provide a significant buffer from the parking lane. The thing to note though is if you were to be implementing these, there's this type of design, which, it might look good on paper, but there's a bit more detail you can add, which can actually improve this to make it even better. And this one is not actually a good example, and I'll show you why. if we consider our curb profiles, so for those that aren't familiar with curb and channel, but they obviously come in different shapes and sizes, and there's a few different terminology around them. If you haven't heard of it before, don't stress. I'm not going to get too technical, but what we will look at is when it's appropriate to have certain profiles on certain facilities. So in the first example, we've got a shear face, which is called a barrier curb, and that's been installed on the bicycle lane side as well as the parking lane side. So it gets a tick for the parking lane because if you are to install, I mean, that's where barrier curbs should be. It's always adjacent, parking lanes or just general carriageway, because it provides a very physical, this is not somewhere where you should be driving, basically. It's a significant warning that you're about to enter a pedestrian space or, cycling space. However, it's not as good to have that on the cycling side of things, because what that means is if the cyclists were, swerving or just out of control or anything like that, and they hit a shear face, the ability to be able to recover is very, it's not going to happen really, which means they're coming off their bike. In the second example, we've got this example of, this ramped kind of profile, and these are called semi-mountable curbs. And you can see it gets the tick there for the bicycle lane, but not for the parking lane. And the reason for that is because it's good for the bike if you've got semi-mountable, because it just provides a ramped connection, and it's less likely a cyclist is going to come off their bike if they come into contact with that ramp. However, it's not so good on the parking side because motorists will park on it. And you might think I'm joking, but I think I've got some slides. Yes, I've got some slides there that just prove that that is the case. If you provide those ramped facilities on the parking side, it's just super easy to get up onto that facility, and you're bringing motorists closer to what was a protected bicycle lane. So the one that gets a tick and a tick is if you've got semi-mountable on the bike lane side and then barrier curb on the parking lane side. Here's a photo of that risk in action. So the curb, it's difficult to see from this angle, but that is the same type of curb as that one there, so semi-mountable. And that's exactly what's happening day in, day out with motorists parking on the separator facility. So it's not doing a great job of separating. If you have a look at this car in particular, if that door swings open, that's certainly within the bicycle lane. So you've kind of, in theory, you've built protected bicycle lanes, but it's no longer offering the same level of protection as it could be. And it's that simple design detail of let's make sure we have barrier curbs for the parking lane. So this was installed, and unfortunately it still looks like this. And there's also a little bit of perhaps politics behind this, as this was a local street, and perhaps just residents are protesting about having bike lanes there, which is also an unfortunate thing to happen, but does happen. But here's what it looks like at night. So if we had just installed this type of barrier curb, if we had to put that there, that would have really reduced that risk altogether. And you think, well, now we have this type of environment, what can we do? We could go out and replace all of that curb on the parking lane side, which would be pretty costly, but you could also look at perhaps just putting bollards in this central separator area, flexible bollards, and that would help also to deter parking on there. But yes, it's may seem like such a minor detail, but it can make a pretty significant impact for cyclist safety. Ken?
Just a little bit of commentary around that one and the challenges and the like, but people pointing out, looks like the traffic lanes are fairly narrow. Are you going to sort of jump into that road cross section widths and those sort of things?
Not for this particular example, but just to give you some context about this design. So this is just a local street where it's not uncommon for there to be one traffic lane where parking is on either side, and you just kind of have to slow and give way and prop in the parking lane, give way to oncoming vehicles, and then go ahead. And so it's not, there's not huge traffic volumes here or anything, and it's just not an uncommon arrangement to have that. It's just the fact that that has changed. What was before 2 lanes that could kind of run continuously to this environment, that's what really upset local residents. And I wish there was a quick and easy answer to get around that, but it's just, it comes down to engagement and trying to spruik all the amazing benefits that the cyclists now have, and getting active transport along this corridor is just phenomenal, economic, health, social, all those beautiful things, and selling that messaging. And it's not an easy thing though. Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, no, I think it's all a good point. I mean, that's right. It's what we're always in, that challenge of changing the road environment. It's what people have been used to for a long time, that people don't often like change and they will resist it. And then we can see a number of the comments coming in around that, people protesting and those sorts of things. It's all very real. Bollards or things in there make it a bit hard for passengers to open their doors, so that's something to consider. If there is parking and you're putting physical things there. Also think about the bins and the like, where those go. Nice idea there from Carolyn about utilizing kids' artwork and things to remind people of the community and people and kids around the area. So lots of good stuff coming in there, but let's keep ticking along.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that idea of the kids' artwork. That's awesome. When we're looking at our separators, it's really important to consider if there are any disabled parking that currently exist or that is being proposed, because you need to consider exactly how those users will then access the adjacent footpath. Because you could imagine it's not going to do anyone any good if there's just separators all the way along there that blocks the access from the disabled parking bay to the footpath. So I've just put this slide in here as a reminder that we also need to be considering, these types of gaps, applying appropriate curb ramps with the, required grades, and ensuring that you're meeting all the DDA requirements. And I also like this idea of actually doing some kind of treatment across the bicycle lane, so cyclists are aware that, people with disabilities or impairments may be crossing at this location. So they could be using colour, it could be, actually putting in some type of pedestrian crossing, which I've got an example of next. But just communicating that to cyclists as well, I think is a good idea. So this one's just as a reminder if you are in that space. Here's one of applying a pedestrian crossing across a bicycle lane, which I'm actually all for. I think it's awesome. I'm all for zebra crossings because they're just universal. Everyone knows what they are. You see it, you see the signs. Okay, pedestrians are crossing here. I've got to slow down. I've got to give way. It's a good treatment to be implementing. People sometimes think you can only do it on the carriageway. You can do it across bike lanes, no problem. You can also see there's a little give way there. There's these rumble strips going across there to further, get cyclists aware that pedestrians would be crossing. The one thing that this particular example is missing. I might need to zoom in here. Very strange that they've done this arrangement where pedestrians are required to kind of walk along the footpath and then step down onto the bicycle lane and then step back up to access the bus stop there. It certainly wouldn't do too well if you were, you weren't fully abled or you had some type of impairments. That would not be an attractive facility. That may mean you cannot access the bus stop or you cannot leave your bus stop. So instead, it would have been a much better idea to make this one level. So the footpath and where the bus stop is one level, and cyclists are ramped up to that. And then you actually got a raised pedestrian crossing point, also called a wombat crossing for those who are interested. So they didn't quite nail the design. They've got the right idea though. I like to see that. Got to get stuck into some other separated treatments. So we showed you the Copenhagen lane, which were the wider ones. These ones here, they're also made out of concrete. You know, they're bulked down, so you could potentially have them as like a temporary, you know, trial type of bike lane. And then if the community appreciate it and they've, you know, lots of positive feedback, then you could look to actually installing them as a permanent facility. But they're super awesome just to be able to get out there and give it a try. And you could do like a 6-month trial. Certainly we have lots of pop-up bike lanes going, you know, across Australia and New Zealand at the moment. And there's lots of these products going around. So something that you could consider as a separator. These ones here, using garden beds or, you know, some type of vegetation planting, can be a really beautiful streetscape project, and can also be good to get the community, I suppose, involved in it. You know, if you want to say, let's have a community planning day and let's get everyone involved, and we'll create this beautiful space here, and that can also protect cyclists. So you've got some good comms there along with it. The negative I kind of see with this, and I'm not trying to be too pessimistic, but just the maintenance of these things, you know, is someone actually going to be trimming it, and is someone going to make sure that there's no leaf litter or debris that, you know, then falls into the bicycle lane? And also just with the height of these planters, is that going to strike someone's pedal? You know, in this example, it's a relatively wide bicycle lane, so it's probably not too great of a risk, but there's some things you need to consider if you're doing this type of treatment. Ken. Oh, you're on mute, Ken.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, there's some good comments and some good discussion coming in there. So people just commenting on different aspects of those things, which is good. And thanks for people for doing that to everybody, so you can get a bit of that conversation. Was the one back I would just want to have a quick look at. Must be Sam there. G'day, Sam. Sam pointed out the side entry pit there, because a bike swallowing side entry pit, and always something to consider when we're putting these facilities up curbside. Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So those types of grates, you want to make sure that they are not longitudinal grates or these types of grates, because then a cyclist tire can get stuck in there, which would not be a good outcome. So luckily I haven't seen too many of those cycling around anymore. I think they're become part of the legacy network, perhaps, Ken, or sorry, it's redundant now, but yeah, we tend to see the grates which have some type of infill like this, so there's a reduced risk of that occurring. But it's a good pickup.
Yeah, and I think even just the sort of the fact that it juts out in the angle and it'll still be slippery is it's not ideal. So it's always something to think about. Comments on the profile of that curbing with the more barrier curb on the parking, or on the not parking side, but the vehicle side, and the more mountable. So I think that's it's a good pickup there from Jamie as well. Yeah, might let you keep going. A little bit of commentary coming in on the side entry pits and the stuff, which is good.
Fabulous. Thanks, Ken. Thanks everyone for sharing. Lots of good intel. Actually, I might ask a question here as well. Got this beautiful, colourful example of some separators here. Any ideas where this one would have been taken? Maybe for the first, people might recognise that giant skyscraper type thing. Nice sunny day there as well.
The jig's gone Auckland.
That's correct. It's Federal Street in Auckland. So well done. Well, let's give a prize out there, Ken.
Yeah. Well, we did have a few other guesses. Canada, because Toronto's got a building very similar, and Seattle has a similar building. We had those guesses as well. So, but yes, that's Auckland.
It's Auckland.
I actually, didn't know from the tower. I know from the pop-up treatment. I've seen different photos of that one there in Auckland.
Very, very colourful, and certainly an improvement what was there before, which was just a bit of a free-for-all. But yeah, you can see lots of pavement markings with these colours, these planter boxes, and also these kind of low-profile humps that kind of used to delineate the space as well, or the edge.
Damo's questioning how drainage might work in that scenario. I think it's this scenario he's talking about. So I assume it's saying, is it a V drain? between the path and the cyclist there. So imagine
Yeah,
it must be.
I'm guessing so. Yeah.
Hmm.
Looks, don't know where the water goes, but certainly going
Back
down
to
this way.
Back towards us, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar kind of queries that I had from a previous example where you are doing these planter boxes, but just who's going to maintain them? If they do get knocked, who's going to, make sure that they're not encroaching into the cycle lane? You can see that this soil's just been dumped there on the carriageway as well, which is a bit unusual. But yeah, I'm not saying I'm against any of these ideas. I love to see a bit of colour. It's really awesome to get these streetscape improvements. It can make the community more involved and more appreciative of their areas and the like. But yeah, you can also see, like, if you're a cyclist, like this looks fairly narrow, particularly when you've got grates and the like there, which means you're riding closer and closer to those planter boxes, which means you could potentially collide with them on your pedal. Or yeah, just some things to consider. I'm not saying they're showstoppers, but yeah, something to think about. Another type of facility. Oh, sorry, Ken.
No, sorry. Is that priority for cyclists, or?
I believe that it is. I believe that this crossing was. I need to double check that though. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this was priority for cyclists. Yep. I'll hop into that link later on and double check that. Bike Auckland, they did a piece on this particular example and evaluated it. So
yep.
I'll have a flick through that. Another type of separation treatment though, another one that I love. These guys, they've got let's pop this out to the group as well. Any idea what this type of separation treatment is called? These little guys, and I'll give you a clue. The name of the product is a type of animal, and the animal looks like that type of product. So there's a definite link there.
Wow, Kieran was in very quickly with armadillo.
Beautiful.
Followed by a few others. Usually somebody says the bumblebee due to the colour nature of it, but armadillo is correct, isn't it?
For those who've forgotten what an armadillo looks like, that's our little friend there. But yeah, they're used somewhat, they're used fairly frequently in North America and Europe. We've got some examples here in Oz. There's a new section in Geelong that's been installed. There's in Fremantle they've been installed over in WA, as well as Perth. They, obviously they probably don't do the same level of separation in terms of motorists are aware where their lane ends and the cycle lane starts, because they're very low to the ground. There's not a great deal of, visual kind of, visual conspicuity that, this is where two facilities separate. So that they don't do a fantastic job of that. But to talk about their advantages, they are 100% recycled plastic, which I love to see. It's all bolt down as well. So it's super easy to maintain, if they're struck or whatever, or they're just, not behaving as they should, you can move them around fairly easily. Not the same with like a precast concrete curb or anything like that. So much easier to install, but it's just another option you've got out there for separators. Okay.
Yeah, a couple of questions on it. I mean, you think it'd be worse or not for cyclists if they had to deviate out of their lane, hitting that or hitting one of the other ones? Other ways that we could delineate that, whether that's more likely to come off. So that's one question. Also, some people saying, yeah, maybe on straights, maybe not on bends.
Yeah.
Are they reflective at night? These are good questions.
Yeah, so if you were to strike them, they do have a fairly, reasonable profile. So I wouldn't expect it to have, a significant impact. You still could become destabilized depending on your speed. So maybe those straight sections would be most appropriate. I've seen them a lot actually approaching intersections where you're already slowing down. So that's probably another good spot to be implementing them. In terms of the reflection, I believe they've got the yellow is actually retro-reflective. For those that haven't heard that term before, it means if you shine your bike light at it or any luminaire source, if you shine it at it, it will shoot back in that direction. So in other words, it's going to come right back to your eyesight, which is a really good thing to have. So a reasonable amount of, ability to see it in low light conditions, assuming you have your bike light and it's on and it's fully charged. But otherwise, there's an argument that it could destabilize cyclists, but I think the advantages of having something there as opposed to just a painted line would outweigh those types of arguments.
Yeah. And Carl just putting a Brisbane example there where they trialled them and had a lot of people coming off downhill bends and the like.
Yeah.
So they removed them. So yeah, thinking about where they might be valuable, I think is good. About half an hour left, Max.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm keeping a track. But yeah, you can see when it's these black and white ones and they blend in a little bit more with the pavement. And these ones are called zebras, by the way. You can easily see how they're run over, both by vehicles and by cyclists. So that's also something to think about. If you've got other options in place, maybe go for those because you want to make them as obvious as possible. These type of flexible bollards, very, very popular at the moment with all these pop-up bike lanes going on. They're bolt down. I love these paddles. They're super good because if a motorist is to hit them, they're going to fling right back up and, hopefully live to fight another day. And, they're just a really good way to delineate the space between the cycle lane and general traffic. There's another example that I've got here of these flexible bollards as well. And this one, it used to be, before this was a pop-up bike lane, cyclists were forced to ride along this bridge here. You can see the bridge on that side there and share with pedestrians, super narrow environments, really awful. So cyclists actually got to claim one of the traffic lanes and they put these flexible bollards there to separate the road users, and been a real big win for cyclists in this example. But I've included all these just to show that, people think protected bicycle lanes and they think it's got to be concrete, you've got to have a meter width or something like that, and it's got to be beautiful and perfect. But even these, you can consider this a step change if you like, but this already is such an improvement from what would be, cyclists riding on the road, cyclists, riding on the footpath to avoid getting near cars, just even providing these types of treatments are just a big win. So don't be deterred if you can't do the gold standard to get started. Maybe just you work your way up to that treatment. And the final one here I've got is also of a flexible bollard, which is just a single unit by itself. Not a big fan of this one in particular because it's actually next to a parking lane. You can park there outside of peak hours, and that means doors can potentially open in that space. But just wanted to show you another type of product. Ken?
Both of those examples there had audio tactile line marking. Any comments on that?
I don't know why you install it in urban environments, really, just as a general thing, but maybe, it would just be to let motorists know that they're potentially veering out of their lane and entering the bicycle lane. I would think that the flexible bollards do a pretty good job of doing that as well. So yeah, is it necessary? Yeah, I don't think it's doing too much harm because it's on the other side of the bicycle lane. When they're on this side of the bicycle lane, that's when some cyclists get a little bit concerned, but either way, I don't see it as an end of the world type of treatment one way or the other.
Yeah, there was a trial, I suppose, with the bollards and some sort of separator. It's sort of much of a muchness when it is just a bike lane as such, or has a bit of buffer painted. Can be an effective treatment. In fact, there was an evaluation of it done, sort of minimising the amount of vehicles entering or lessening it. But yeah, I mean, in this case, it's the actual separators that are doing the trick. Not really. Good, thanks.
That's okay. We'll talk about on-road bicycle lanes now. So we've moved away from our protected bicycle lanes, and it's that time of day, Ken, where we asked, what's wrong with this photo? And we can see, oh, look at that confused cyclist. He doesn't know what's going on, huh? Trying to work out what's happening here. I'll get rid of him. Just so
That's my default look.
so you can have a quick look, but I've just got anyone in the chat wants to pop down any ideas what's wrong with this photo, or maybe some risks that you can see.
Okay, we'll give it a second. We've got a couple of comments coming in there. Cyclists in the dooring zone, dooring heads walking in the bike lane, dooring risks, lots of dooring risks. People putting in there. There's that one's got audio tactile. Skateboard in the cycle lane.
That's very good vision. I'll just see if I can get a close up of that. That's the first time we've actually seen someone spot that. There we go. Skateboard in the cycle lane. Let's give a prize out there, Ken.
Prize?
Yeah, that's prize. I love that eagle vision.
It was
that's
two.
fantastic.
It was Jig and Gareth, right? Pretty much at the same time that popped up. So I'm going to give them both the prize.
I might just continue on there, Ken. I appreciate it. The main risk there, though, which I heard a lot of, which is that dooring risk, which is certainly what you want to be taking out of that image. Compared to what we were looking at before, those protected bicycle lanes, this is just not as comfortable for a cyclist to be in. You're kind of riding almost white-knuckled, hoping that a door doesn't open in front of you, because your ability to swerve around before you enter the live traffic lane is pretty limited, particularly if it's a busy road. You can't see behind you either. You don't have rear view or side mirrors on your bicycle generally. So there's risks of colliding with the door itself, or going around and colliding with live traffic as well. So dooring, very significant issue. As mentioned before, it's about a 1.2 meter swing from the edge of the car to the edge of the door. So it's really important, if you've got the carriageway, to create a substantial buffer from the dooring zone. I actually got this quick video. Hopefully this plays okay. Just take the pen off. And this is an example of our very own Ken being involved in a bit of a near miss, cycling in the bicycle lane and doing everything he should as a cyclist, wearing high vis and, appropriately cycling where he should be in the bike lane. And yes, just someone opening their door without any consideration. And luckily, Ken's super speed and swerve skills got him out of that near miss. Bring back memories, Ken?
Yeah, you were right in front of me there. It's amazing how often it does happen. I'm sure many of our participants are cyclists, and you're sort of constantly avoiding those, aren't you?
That's right. It can be a nervous time. This is a graph that I just wanted to quickly show. It's one of those ones which I'm not really sure needed to be ever, commissioned as a study, but it's just showing where those dooring accidents tend to occur. And with no surprises, the driver side door is the most common type of incident to occur. If there's a vehicle, there's a driver, I guess. So it makes a lot of sense that that's the most common. Also, bicycle lanes are typically adjacent to the dooring zone, the driver's side door. So once again, makes a lot of sense to be on that side. Perhaps not as obvious is the fact that dooring can still occur on that side as well. You may get this from, if you could imagine you're approaching an intersection and a vehicle has stopped there. Let's just say it's a taxi or an Uber, and it's adjacent a bicycle lane and cyclists are coming up in this direction. And then the passengers, they want to get out. And so they just fling open their door. And that's when those type of incidents can occur as well. So it is both sides of the vehicle, but certainly that's the majority of time is the driver's side. Nothing too difficult to understand about that. I might just skip over this, but it's basically just a way to, I suppose, consider different treatments of what may be appropriate depending on who your priority user is, whether it's traffic, cyclists. I'll let you digest that. It's nothing too revolutionary anyway. But I will just spend a bit of time on this one here. So this is a bicycle lane in Melbourne on Glenferrie Road, for those that are familiar. And they basically only installed the green paint in this narrow little strip. The idea was, this was a trial, let's get cyclists riding further away from the dooring zone. So rather than being right in the middle, you're closer to the live traffic. Generally, experienced riders already do that because you're more worried about a door opening than what's happening behind you. So generally, cyclists would be riding in there as well. But this green paint idea was just a way to encourage that movement. And yeah, it actually did have some type of results. 75% of cyclists surveyed, they felt more comfortable after the installation of that green little strip, which is, so their perception of risk seems to have dropped, which is interesting. And it also had the effect of getting motorists driving closer to the center line, which is also a good thing to happen for cyclists. So yeah, there's kind of a twofold benefit there. Not saying that this is the best practice example and this is what we should be doing on all our roads, but this is still currently, so it was meant to be a trial, but it's still currently like this out there on Glenferrie Road. And yeah, it seems to be working there, which is interesting. In New Zealand, they had this type of idea where they just got this kind of dotted green line in the bicycle lane. The idea isn't that cyclists ride on that green line. It's just to be a constant reminder to traffic that that's where cyclists are. So I suppose instead of doing a bicycle pavement logo or symbol, you know, every 200 meters, you've got these little green strips that are just dotted along. The evaluation for that hasn't come out, but that's been installed in Hastings in New Zealand for those that are interested. But once again, wouldn't see that as, you know, revolutionizing this on-road facility. It's just another trial that for those that are interested. This is what's called a double chevron treatment. So those pavement markings are called chevrons, and it's really awesome to have a buffer both between the parking lane and general traffic. Obviously, you require the carriageway width to be able to facilitate that, which maybe, you know, maybe you don't have that to begin with, but it's a really good thing to be able to do as like a really low cost intervention, because you're not having to shift parking lanes or move any curb and channel or anything like that. That's just laying down some paint, really. There's some actual specific guidance there for those that are interested to suggest appropriate widths for chevrons, bike lane widths, parking lane widths, and also the traffic lane there as well. So low speed environments, so you're talking there. You can also do that just on one side of the bicycle lane. So this is an example where it's only been installed adjacent to the parking lane. You would do that in environments where there's high turnover in vehicles and there's obviously lots of doors opening and closing. That's when you'd look at installing it on that side. Also included some guidance there for some widths and stuff. Conversely, you can put it on the other side where you're expecting longer periods of parking. So doors aren't that commonly opened and closed. Well, here's another example of that. So this could be like all day parking, or it's just residential. That's when you may put this chevron on that side. Anecdotally or personally speaking, I prefer it on the door inside regardless, because I'm always much more concerned about a door opening than traffic behind me. But that's just the guidance that's currently out there. But yeah, you can also do a risk assessment to determine what would be the most appropriate. We've also got these things called exclusive bike lanes, where it's basically just paint that separates, a single solid center line marking that separates the bicycle facility. Sometimes it can be painted green throughout, or generally just at conflict points. I would argue if you're ever doing this type of treatment, you know, if you've said that this is exclusively for cyclists and you've already got space there that's meant for cyclists, why not just go a step further and just start separating cyclists as well? putting some type of separation in there, I think would be a much better outcome. So not a big fan of the exclusive bike lanes. I think there's a bit of improvement to be done there, typically also because they're installed in high speed environments. Speaking of which, this is another one that's not a very good example at all. Wide curbside lanes, which perhaps they have just a bit of dotted lines every now and then a bicycle symbolic pavement marking. This doesn't really do anything to protect cyclists, doesn't really make people feel comfortable riding there. So yeah, not one I'd really advocate for. There's much better things to be doing there in the cycling space. And these are also regularly found on like 70, 80 km/h roads. So not too good. Got to jump into mixing traffic. So where cyclists are basically take control and they're in the general traffic lane. When we want to be looking at that is in these low speed environments, so less than 40 km/h. Really useful graph if you need to work out what types of treatments to be putting in. So that's when we would consider lane sharing. And the way to facilitate that lane sharing is through the use of these sharrows. They're called shared arrows, and it's basically a way to indicate that cyclists, you can now take the traffic lane, and to motorists, okay, cyclists are now taking the traffic lane as well. So it communicates both to cyclists and to general motorists as well, that there's no longer forced to ride at the curbside, that they can come and just act like a car basically. Obviously, low speed environments. Got this example here of the sharrow being installed there, and also just in the distance there, this is a 30 km/h speed zone as well. So this is a good example of installing them. You can also see in the background there, kind of speed humps to make sure that operating speeds aren't getting high. Another example there of the sharrows being installed with the 30. These type of local area traffic management treatments, big fan of these. Cyclists, they can ride adjacent and they're not forced to slow down, whereas motorists, they're forced to slow, give way to oncoming because it's just a one-way environment. And yeah, it's just really good to see if you can provide that cut through for cyclists. Another example there in Christchurch of that type of facility in place. Got a few more examples of this local area traffic management, but might just check in with Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Max. No, just some good commentary coming in. Lots of good sort of just people making comments, which I won't cover all of those. There was a comment around the width of parking lanes down to a 2 meter parking lane, helping with potential dooring, so I suppose pushing people as close to curb as possible when they park. Any comments on that? Yeah, so I understand that can be a risk. If it's the other way around and you have the parking that's adjacent the live traffic lane and you've got a really narrow parking lane, so say it's a 2 meter as well, and then you've got motorists open their door and it's bang on the carriageway, that can also be a pretty significant risk, particularly if that's a bus route or heavy vehicles are there and they obviously take up a much wider space in the traffic lane. And so having super narrow parking lanes there, can also be a significant risk. But it's difficult to say with a blanket approach, this is appropriate here, not appropriate there. You need to consider these in the exact environment that you've got. And the other questions come in from Amanda there around, will cyclists need to adhere to the 30 km/h speed limit restrictions?
I would say yes. I'm pretty sure that they do, because they're considered users of the network, and they're just, I assume they could be fined as well for traveling above the speed limit. Yeah, no, I would consider that. It's true.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I mean, 30 km/h on a bike's moving pretty fast. I mean, it's certainly downhills and things like that. You can go above that, but it's okay.
I might continue on just because I want to get to this assignment as well there, Ken. So
Oh yeah, sorry, Max.
appreciate all the
Good.
chat coming through though. I told you it was a big day today. There's lots of content here, but wanted to show you this as an example of another way to manage traffic flows and traffic volumes, local area traffic management device. And this is like a partial closure. And I'll just draw, so I've got this actually already drawn up, but this shows the routes that motorists would be forced to take if they wanted to continue through this environment, which is not a pleasant thing to be doing as a motorist. So motorists are then they're taking alternative routes, which is arterial roads, which is what you want to happen, which is a good thing. The only negative of this is you're then forcing motorists to cross over the bicycle lane twice. So you've introduced two conflict points that if that break there, if that wasn't there, they could have just gone side by side. So you've induced this risk, which perhaps wasn't there before. Another example of this is how it's shown on the ground, and I'll just go to the bird's eye straight away. But if you did a full closure instead, and then once again, this is a local network, so we don't really want to see lots of through traffic here or using this as a rat run. This is a much better outcome because motorists are basically forced to turn around and then use the local streets to get back to arterials. They can't head on through, and they're not interacting with the cyclist facility at all. Conversely, cyclists, they can cut straight through and they get that beautiful route through there. So another really good thing to consider, make it more convenient for cyclists if it's on your priority routes and less convenient for motor traffic as well. That is the end of today's session. Lots and lots of content there. So if you did want to flick through an email, if we didn't get to any of your questions, let me know. It's just an example there of what not to do. If you've got the curb ramp there, trying to get cyclists onto a path, don't block the path off. Sounds fairly intuitive, but these things do happen. And I might hop on to the assignments, but I'll check in with Ken to see if I've got any questions to answer.
A few little bits and pieces, but let's jump into the assignment and we'll see if we get time there to just come back to those. But great commentary, great discussion there, everybody. Thank you. And there's the assignment up on screen, Max.
That's it. Thank you, Ken. I might hop back into Moodle just so we can see exactly how things get started. Hopefully this is familiar to those. You've got your access and it's all working well. Module 2, what we've just covered today, you'll see that there's another video there, which I will get you to watch before next week on Tuesday. So have a flick through that, maybe just get started on it at the end of this session. So you've allocated some time, or do it over lunch. It's only 5 or 6 minutes long, so it's not too long. And there's also this module 2 assignment. So I'll just click on this link here. And this one is due on Friday the 11th. So that's actually tomorrow. So I think we can extend that. That might just be an admin error, but we'll push that out to Friday week. So it'll be Friday the 18th. And you'll see there's 2 documents in there, and we'll get you to download both of those. I've already got them on my screen, so I might just share that with you right now. I'll share the PDF first. And this is an actual concept design of some cycling facilities. And it's in York Street in Tasmania. For those that aren't familiar with that, it's in Launceston. You don't need to know all the history of the site or anything like that. We don't want you to look up traffic volumes or, know exactly the road environment or everything. We don't want you to do a detailed review, but we would like you to hop onto Google Maps, into the street view, and just, drag the man up and down and have a look around to see what type of environment currently exists. And then also hop through these plans and see what is being proposed as part of this cycling improvement work. So if you have any trouble, if you're not a designer or you don't get into the design space at all, and this just looks like Latin to you, then just give us a call. We can step through it one-on-one. That's not an issue. But there's a legend down there which just spells out what the different colors and things mean and what's being proposed. And yes, so we've got some kind of raised surfacing happening at different intersections. There seems to be a green cycle lane that's being installed and things like that. So flick through the different sheets. There's only 4 different pages there. So have a flick through all of that. And then in the Word document, which you would also have downloaded, we'll just pop down the steps that are required to complete this assignment. So step 1 is download and review the design file, which we just went through there. Review the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View. So if you click on that link there, that will take you exactly to York Street in Launceston. Drop the little fellow down there and then just have a look around just so you can see how the current road environment looks. Step 3 is fill out the table provided below. And then step 4 is save and upload the file to Moodle. So we'll just go through the questions that is required. So first things first is you'll insert your name there. So just make sure we've got a record of who is completing this assignment. And we've got 3 questions. The first question is, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? So that's where doing the street view exercise is important. So you can see what's currently out there. How would cyclists travel through there? Where would they be required to ride? Are there any facilities, etc.? Just put it in dot points, put it in a paragraph, nothing too onerous there. We don't want to see pages and pages in this assignment. Question number 2, how does the design cater for cyclists? So what are the interventions that are being proposed in the design that hopefully improve the level of safety for cyclists? Can you just basically, once again, just dot pointing out what are the different features there that are being installed for cyclists, or what's changing in the design? And the third one is the one that I suppose we're getting you to think most laterally and start thinking about the 2 different modules we've done so far, and actually thinking about, well, what treatments or changes in the design could you recommend to improve cyclist safety? So what we've been going through on Tuesday and today is all about best practice cycling design. And so let's see if we can start reviewing some of that information and recommending it as part of this assignment. So maybe flick through the slides to get some ideas and think of ways that you could potentially improve this design so you've got a better outcome for cyclists. And we're just asking you to give us 3. So rather than list every single thing that we've talked about over the last couple of days, we'll just get you to list 3 that you think practically could work. I'm not going to give you any funding constraints or anything like that. This is a fairly open slather assignment, so that's good. Yeah, I'm not going to be too critical about politics or anything like that. Let's just assume that as long as it could, physically be installed within that space, let's just assume that you can put that in the assignment. And once you've completed all that, it should take, I'd say, 10, 15 minutes tops. We don't want to, take too much time out of your day. We'll get you to save that. And if you could save it as a PDF, it just helps at our end of things and on the Moodle side of things. So we'll get you to save it as a PDF. You hop back into Moodle, and down at the bottom here, yours will show something different. It will say add submission, and you just click on add, you upload your file. We get a notification saying so-and-so has uploaded assignment 2. We'll have a look into that and we'll review it, provide feedback, and we'll give you a grade as well. So these are graded. If we do notice any discrepancies or anything that perhaps wouldn't actually work or wouldn't improve cyclist safety, we'll have a conversation about that just to make sure everything has been understood thus far. But hopefully everyone doesn't have too many issues with that assignment number 2. So you've got to watch the video, which you can probably do at the end of this session, and assignment number 2, all prior to our next Tuesday meeting, preferably. But we will extend that deadline to Friday the 18th. Ken, any points?
Thanks, Max. So yeah, I suppose back in Moodle there was just showing where the 360 for this session was. Did you do that?
Say again, sorry?
Just, I suppose, showing where the 360 footage from today.
Yeah, I think I shared it, but I didn't actually click on the link itself. Yeah, but it's just under module 2. There's a 360-degree video and it says module 2 on-road facility. So that's the one we'll get you to click on.
Good. Yeah. And same thing, you'll be able to watch it. And anybody whose goggles haven't arrived yet, I'm sure they're hopefully on the way. Otherwise, yeah, you can do it just the way I did. Showed you last session where you just do it on the desktop and scroll around. Good. Thanks, Max. I think we probably covered off everything there, unless there's any final points.
I might just, we did talk quickly about the speed limit for cyclists, so that 30 km/h applies to cyclists as well. It just jigged a little memory, but they're on like this South Bank in Melbourne, like a very pedestrianised promenade area along the river. There's actually a 10 km/h speed limit for cyclists, and the police, they actually did an enforcement program. I think it was over about 4 weeks or something like that, and they actually had the radar gun out there, and they were issuing fines for people going above 10. Most of them were just warnings, but for those that were blatantly, you know, going 30 and 40 km/h through that heavy pedestrianised precinct, they were issuing fines. So yes, it is actually a legal requirement to cycle to the speed limits. Just thought I'd share that little anecdote, but other than that, you don't have the speedo on the bike. That's a fair point, but I think generally you can judge if you are riding too fast. Like you may not know exactly what 10 km/h is, but you know that you shouldn't be cycling at full pelts through a pedestrian network. And that's, I think there's that little bit of reasonableness approach in enforcing that particular speed. But yeah, I don't have a speedo on my bike either.
Yep. Good. All right. Thanks, Max. Thanks, everybody. Keep in contact if you've got any questions about your assignment. So flick an email through or give Max or myself a call, and we'll get that due date changed. But yeah, just jump into it and don't overthink and overwork it. It's a relatively short exercise, popping a few thoughts down, having a look, thinking back over what we've covered. But thanks for the great input. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you. What is it? Tuesday. Is that
See you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend. Stay safe.
Log in a bit early for Max's trivia again and more chances to win prizes. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye.